Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
My name is Juan, and I'm a recovering addict, and this is Inside Addiction.
Welcome to the show, Juan. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, about where you're from, how you grew up?
I was born in the South Bronx in the 60s and 70s. Dysfunctional family, a lot of drinking. That's how I got started with drinking, and eventually graduated to smoking marijuana in high school. And they say marijuana is a gateway drug, and for me that was especially true because it led me to everything that you can possibly think about, with my last drug of choice, of course, being crack cocaine.
Do you remember the first time you used crack?
First time I used crack was with a girlfriend of mine, and actually, believe it or not, I was on heroin at the time, and she said, "I don't want you to get mad at me, but I smoke crack." I said, "Well, don't smoke it around me." She went to the other room, smoked it. She did this a couple of times, and then I got curious and tried it. First time wasn't all that great. The second time, I got hooked. From then on, it was just a spiral. Everything went downhill from there. I lost everything because of that.
At what point did you enlist in the military?
Believe it or not, I enlisted in the military in October of 1985, and I did so because of the crack epidemic. I was actually, one of the biggest things was this crack was becoming an epidemic. I love to experiment with drugs, and I knew that eventually I was going to experiment with crack, and I heard all the horror stories. I didn't want to be a part of that, so I enlisted in the Army. That was just one of the major reasons. Another one was to get away from my family, but basically I just wanted to get away from drug usage, and I figured that the military would help me with that.
Were you tested when you joined the military? Were you drug tested?
Yes.
And were you using when you joined?
I was high when I was tested. But this was in the early days of testing. So, they kind of gave you a grace. For me, they did anyway, because I knew I was hot. I was hot with marijuana. I had drank the night before. So I was pistol hot, but the results came back. They took me anyway. From then on, though, no dirty urines. I couldn't give any. So.
Were you tested throughout your deployment? Because you're a Desert Storm veteran.
Yes, I am. Before we went to Desert Storm, for about 2 months prior to that, that was the last time that we got tested. I was going off to war, so I figured I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to be coming back. So that's when I started smoking marijuana. The first time since I joined the military that I smoked marijuana. And then once we came back, we couldn't drink when we were out there. We couldn't, because it was a dry theater or dry country. When we came back, everybody let everything hang out, because for like 90 days, we couldn't do anything wrong. So.
What types of things did you try to block out or forget through using after your deployment and when you returned to the United States?
Well, I have abandonment issues that I have related to the military, and I'll explain a little bit. I was in Bravo Company, 8th Engineer Battalion, 1st Cavalry Division, and while we were deployed to Desert Storm, this was before the war actually started, quote-unquote war started. I came down with pneumonia, and I was medevaced to a first aid station, hospital, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know how I got there because I was basically knocked out. But the only thing that I left with was my BDU bottoms, my top, and a pair of flip-flops. When I got to the hospital, I had to be reissued a gas mask. But coming back, it took me longer to come back than it did to recover. And I had to go through various units in order to get back to my home unit. But everywhere that I went to, I went without a mask, without a weapon, without any protective gear. I was basically defenseless. So anytime that they sounded the Scud alarm...
In the middle of a war-stricken country.
Yeah. I had nothing but my gas mask. And I was scared. I didn't think that I was scared at the time, but looking back on it, I was frightened because I didn't want to get overrun and not be able to defend myself. I wanted to take somebody out before they took me out, and I was like easy prey. It got to a point where there was a commander for 1st Cavalry Division, assistant commander, I think it was a colonel. He comes up and he asks me, I've seen you here quite a bit and you don't have your uniform. If I see you here tomorrow, I'm going to assign you to this. I'm going to cut orders for you and I'm going to assign you to this unit. And I wish he would have done that because when I got back to my unit, I really didn't want to be a part of that unit anymore. I was so, and I was a leader. I was a sergeant. And I really did not want to be a part of that unit because I felt like they didn't take any steps to bring me back. Even though I called them and told them, hey, I'm here, pick me up. It took them 2 weeks to get me.
Wow.
There was another thing that happened where the barracks that I was staying at the day after I left got blown up. And it wasn't really traumatic, but it made me think. It made me, like, what if I hadn't left? You start thinking all these crazy things.
Would have, could have, should have.
Yeah, and
Yep.
and then you also have. I was a combat engineer, and in Desert Storm, the enemy was using plastic mines, plastic explosives and mines and things of that nature. So when other soldiers would see it and they don't know what it was, they would pick it up and blow parts of their bodies off.
How much of that did you see?
I saw quite a bit of it, and I got sick and tired of seeing, tributes where you have the soldier's boots, his weapon, and his Kevlar sitting on top of it. It just made me sick, and that's why to this day, I really don't follow what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. I really feel for those young men and women, and I hope they all come back safe, but I know they won't.
And some of them, like yourself, I'm assuming, to cope with that pain and abandonment, are going to turn to alcohol and drugs. Alcohol
first, drugs come later. Alcohol because that's the one thing that the military will let you do. And
while you're deployed?
I don't know if it's the same thing when I was in, but I imagine that if there's in the same theater of operations, that they can't drink. So you build up a desire for wanting what makes you feel good, what makes you feel comfortable.
An escape.
An escape, right? And so by the time they get back, these kids are primed for mayhem, basically. All right? I know when I came back, I bought a 6-pack
How
And
soon before you came back? Were you off to the races?
Well, when we were in Desert Storm, we were getting ready to come back. We had a meeting with the officers, and the officers were asking us how many beers should we let the soldiers drink on their way to Germany and then on the way home. I said none, and that was voiced by other NCOs because we knew that some soldiers basically didn't drink. Very, very, very few. I think like maybe 1 or 2 out of a battalion might not drink. But everybody else drinks, and when you get them started, they're going to want more. So it was decided not to give them anything to drink until we hit the ground in Texas. When we got to Texas, that was it.
It was over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you went to alcohol, any other thing? Anything else?
What, after coming back from Desert Storm?
Yeah, did you revisit crack?
Yeah. No, I didn't mess with crack until I got out of the service. What I did was I huffed insecticide, believe it or not, when I was in Desert Storm because there was nothing to get high with.
You were there.
Yeah.
So you were in Afghanistan huffing.
Actually, in Iraq at the time. It was first Saudi, then Iraq. But I huffed a couple of times because there was nothing else to do.
Were you the only one huffing?
Actually, I was introduced to it by one of my soldiers.
Really?
By one of my soldiers. So, you know, and it's something that I should have put my foot down and said no and taken the can from him or whatever. But when you put in those kinds of situations, you really don't know how you're going to react. And I really am not proud of myself in talking about this part of my career in the service. But it's something that has to be brought up because
it's reality.
Right. So, again, the major damage didn't really start happening, and then when I came back from Desert Storm, then I got back together again with my wife, who I was separated with before the war. So the war actually brought us together, but then eventually my addictions would drive us apart. So,
when did you finally receive help and where?
It didn't. None of this would have been possible had I not been arrested for drug dealing on January 17th, 2007. I wasn't even dealing drugs, but I'm not even. That's what I was charged with, and that's what brought me here. So yes, I was dealing drugs. I was given the option of either serving 2 to 4 in prison or coming into rehab. Now, mind you, other than one other time in my life, I really have not had any major brushes with the law. You know, DWIs and stuff like that when I was in the military, that's common.
Driving while intoxicated is common in the military.
Yeah. Yeah. No, driving while intoxicated. There's a lot of things you do while you're intoxicated in the military. At least when I was in. I don't know how much, I don't know what the military has done since that to curb that situation. I hope that they've done a lot. The biggest thing, though, insofar as the military is concerned, and I must add this, is that the military teaches you how to be aggressive. It teaches you how to be assertive, and it teaches you how to be violent. Teaches you how to take a life.
Does it teach you how to be powerless?
No.
Over an alcohol or drug?
No, and this is why it's so easy for a soldier to become susceptible to addictions of any kind. Because you're a warrior and you can handle it. When often the case is not. But, you know, they teach you all these things on how to be aggressive, how to take a life and all this stuff. And then you're getting out of the service and they don't teach you how to turn it off. Or at least how to deal with it. You know, or because my transition out of the military was, you know, it was like, okay, here's your papers, goodbye, thank you for serving, and that's it.
Wow.
You know, so.
No debriefing for addiction or alcoholism or or huffing?
No, no. Actually, they never found out about the huffing part. But they, you know, what I must be fair in saying that the 2 times that I got caught for DWI in the military, that I was sent to an drug and alcohol class, which is basically telling you what the dangers and the perils of drinking and driving and drugging and driving in the military and all that stuff. It tells you all that, but what it doesn't tell you is what triggers you to drink. It doesn't tell you that maybe there's reason, maybe there's traumas in your life. You know, when I got out of Desert Storm, I was the hero, and I was basically placed upon a pedestal. When I became an addict, I don't exist.
We're joined now by Jim McDonough, Director of Veterans Affairs for the state of New York. Jim, how bad is addiction among our military personnel today, and is Juan's story typical or the exception of the rule?
Well, the best information we have, Dean, is that you go back and look at a couple of years of study. In 2005, when this first started being tracked very well, the data indicated that about 4% of all service members had admitted to abusing substances within the last 30 days. Now, you fast forward to 2008, and that factor jumps to about 13%. And we know today what the data tells you is that about 1 in 4 service members have in fact admitted to abusing substances in the last 30 days. Primarily it's painkillers, but there are other forms of abuse that are occurring as well.
What type of screening is being done for substance abuse within the military?
The whole screening package is pretty encompassing, but for substance abuse, I'll talk about my own experience. And it's 26 years in the Army. When I first entered the Army, I was given a drug test. And I was randomly tested throughout those 26 years, whether it be on deployment or back in garrison. Our soldiers, and I'll speak from the Army perspective, we were routinely tested for drugs. Now, prior to coming in, you are screened for drug abuse. In fact, there's a question asked if you'll admit to the use of illegal drugs. I will tell you that in today's armed forces, there are certain waivers that can be obtained, and it is a practice of the armed forces to waive, to a degree, the admission of abuse of drugs. The type of testing is no different than prior to deployment. Random urinalysis screening is the preferred method of substance abuse detection within the armed forces. What is added to urinalysis is the type of drugs that are screened for. Years gone by, THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, was a fundamental factor within screening. When you get into new forms of pharmaceuticals, the Army Substance Abuse Program, its screening markers have been expanded to include many of the new types of substance abuse that occurs. So it evolves over time.
What type of substance abuse treatment is available to vets? Who can they call? Where can they go?
Sure. The first thing I'm going to kind of lay this out as is that let's talk about returning service members for a second. Right now in our country, about 2 million young Americans have fought in either Iraq or Afghanistan. That's out of about an overall population of about 23 million veterans. So 2 million of the 23 million are veterans of these wars. For every individual who's served actively since 9/11/2001, from the date they separate, they're eligible for 5 years of free health care from the VA. So if you separate from the United States Army in the year 2010, and you served honorably and actively, you are going to be eligible for free health care, bumper to bumper, for the next 5 years. Now, that 5 years comes and goes. So, if you don't take advantage of your health care while you're, freshly out of service, you're missing an opportunity. For the 5 years that come and go, I would like to recommend that people contact us at the New York State Division of Veterans Affairs so that we can make the proper referral into whatever system we can to help them.
What types of things, substance abuse, have you witnessed throughout your career?
Yeah, rank doesn't matter in this. I will tell you, I served for 26 years. I served alongside commissioned officers who had abused substances while serving just as frequently as enlisted service members have. So there's no differentiation between rank in this area, I think. Whatever the stresses are, whether they be combat related, family, or whatever, they're dealt with in generally universal practice, depending on not depending upon what side of the Army or service you come from. You can be enlisted or officer and still be coping with everything you're trying to get through. So it's not rank unique. It just isn't. It's common. When you're talking about 25% of our armed forces who have admitted to abusing forms, of drugs or alcohol, you're talking about a sizable population of individuals in service. My own experience, just recently, this past week, I was out in Western New York visiting a community-based residential treatment facility. And most people are going to assume that this problem is prevalent amongst Vietnam veterans, and nothing could be further from the truth. Out of a residential treatment facility where 30 veterans were staying for up to 2 years, a third were from this generation. That means they fought in either Iraq or Afghanistan. So you're talking about 10 of 30 were in fact in a residential treatment facility in Western New York trying to cope with their substance abuse problems. So my experience tells me this is a growing problem. All the things you're seeing and reading about in the news, the incidents of suicide being on the increase, the incidences of substance abuse on the increase, stress from these wars, all that stuff indicates that the veteran community, like previous generations of veterans, has a problem to contend with and to treat for its returning service members.
Jim, thank you again for joining us today. Juan, what advice would you give to someone in the military personnel, maybe the wife, the husband, the mother, the father of someone in the military that possibly could be struggling with an addiction right now? What advice would you give them?
First of all, before it even becomes an addiction, because these soldiers coming back, if they're drinking more heavily than when they left, be concerned, okay? Be concerned. My thing is that immediately upon coming back, these soldiers should seek out help. They should seek out counseling. They should seek out a way to debrief themselves for everything that they saw out there and learn how to process that information, all right? In such a way that while it won't lessen the night or take away nightmares, because I still have them, you can come to grips with them. You know what I'm saying? You may need medication. Mm-hmm. I suffer from bipolar disorder. I didn't know that until 1997, you know? And then addictions kind of take you bipolar. I'm high. I don't care, you know. But the biggest thing that I can give, the biggest advice that I can give to any soldier, any family member of a soldier coming back, wife, husband, child, if you see these behaviors, all right, approach that soldier and let them know that you love them. And that while you can't understand the traumas of war, that you certainly want to be a part of helping them cope with these things. You can't take out of a soldier's mind seeing his best friend blown up. You can't take out of a soldier's mind a child being shot. You just can't do that. But, with enough treatment, and that's the key, and some more than others. But everybody without exceptions, enlisted officers, I don't care what position you held out, if you were in that combat theater and you saw some action, you need to see somebody so that they can help you out. Other than that, you're really playing Russian roulette. You're not playing Russian roulette with a pistol. You're playing Russian roulette with a 9mm and a round is chambered.
Or a machine gun. Juan, thank you for sharing your story, because your story matters.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.